Konnichiwa minasan. Welcome back to Shogun History. Today we explore the real history behind the English pilot who shipwrecked in Japan and whose knowledge of the Western world would see him garner the trust of the most powerful man in the land of the rising sun. The acclaimed Shogun series sees Cosmo Jarvis portray the pilot, John Blackthorne, as he navigates the troubled waters of feudal Japanese politics. But who was the real man who inspired this story? Stay tuned as we uncover the true story of the man they called Anjin. As we know already, the Shogun series is based off the novel by James Clavell. At the time of writing in the 1970s, most of the general public's knowledge of Japan came from World War II and Japanese imperialism. Clavell himself was actually a Japanese prisoner of war, where he suffered terribly, but I have to admit, I'm quietly awed that he came through that experience without a lifelong hatred for his captors. Many years later, so the story goes, Clavell was helping his daughter with her homework when he came across a sentence that read, "In the 1600s, an Englishman went to Japan and became a samurai." This ambiguous sentence manifested the inspiration for his best-selling novel. The real Englishman this was referring to was named William Adams. Clavell changed his name to John Blackthorne, as he did with all the characters in the story, to enable an artistic license and not be bound to the precise retelling of history. William Adams was born in Kent, England, in 1564. After the loss of his father at age 12, he became an apprentice to a shipyard owner, where he spent the next 12 years learning shipbuilding, astronomy, and navigation before war broke out with Spain, and Adams would be enlisted into the Royal Navy. In 1588, Spain attempted an invasion of the British Isles to put an end to what they called the English problem. Here, Adams, alongside many other able-bodied seamen, saw their first taste of battle, defending England's independence and something that might have seemed more important to the people of the time, the Protestant religion. After the invasion, he began to sail in the service of a trading company which largely had ties with Morocco. The perhaps unlikely Protestant-Muslim relationship that flourished in the latter parts of the 16th century was brought about by a mutual interest in attacking Catholics. Therefore, with this endeavour, he was also serving his country. His years of Africa-bound voyages furnished Adams with a valuable experience as a long-distance mariner and nurtured a respect among his contemporaries. This is where the series ties in with history. Like Blackthorne, Adams was hired as a pilot on a Dutch voyage to the Pacific via the Straits of Magellan at the very southern tip of the Americas. It was as much a military mission as a trade one, and damaging Iberian interests was a primary objective. Once more, Adams was serving his country's religious and political aims. Departing from the port of Rotterdam in June 1598, leaving behind a wife, Mary Hinn, who he had married a decade previously, as well as their daughter, Deliverance. He didn't know it at the time, but he would never see his family again. The voyage was fraught with mishaps, entering combat off the coast of Portugal in an attempt to steal much-needed supplies. This failed, and left a cloud of fear and looming hunger amongst his fellow crewmates. The anxiety of Portuguese or Spanish capture was also a constant presence and restricted the vessels from sailing the best routes and restocking at viable anchorages. Their route through the Magellan Strait under South America at this point in time was rarely successfully navigated and caused thousands of deaths in the years prior. Needless to say, a sailor's life in the 16th century was not for the faint of heart. On top of this, due to supply issues delaying their voyage, they would enter the strait in the wrong season, resulting in more than 6 months aboard these bitter, snowy, wind-battered seas. And by the time these ships eventually emerged, in the southern Pacific Oceans, Adams's ship was separated from his compatriot escorts. Stores of food were gone, the vessels were badly damaged, and morale must have been at its lowest ebb. The series has Japan as the crew's main goal in setting up a trading network. However, this is not strictly true. The dire straits of their situation required them to make land somewhere safe, away from Spanish influence, and where they could trade their cargo of wool for much needed supplies. Based on inaccurate information that the Japans were a cold nation and a good place to offload their wool reserves. Though none of the men had set foot there before, they decided it was their best option. After another 6 months, traversing the largest ocean in the world, and fortunately being able to briefly stop in Guam, with inaccurate charts, they somehow successfully found the island of Kuroshima, near the town of Useki in Kyushu. The men were severely famished and battling scurvy. Adams was the most senior crew who was able to walk, and thus took command. One of the series' major plot points is the presence of Catholic Jesuits in Japan and their animosity towards the Protestant castaways. This is indeed accurate. The Jesuit missionaries had been present in Japan for nearly 50 years by this point and had garnered a strong relationship within the political structure. Just as we see in the series, the Catholics knew full well that the presence of Dutch and English Protestants in the country would unlikely work in their favour, and they did their best to persuade the local authorities that the unexpected and unseasonal ship was a pirate vessel. Piracy had been rampant in Japanese waters until recently, and the penalty was unambiguous: death. Fortunately for Adams and the rest of the crew, the authorities followed proper procedures, declining to listen to the Jesuits' plea for the death penalty, and instead reported the incident to the most powerful lord in the land, Tokugawa Ieyasu. In the series, we bear witness to the horrid way one of the Dutch crewmen is executed, boiled alive in a large cauldron. While this did not happen to any of Adams's crew, there is an account of a famous outlaw and his son facing this brutal punishment. The father held his infant son above his head and out of the scalding waters until he eventually succumbed. There is a lot of myth as to whether the son was spared or not after this show of bravery by his father, but the man, Ishikawa Gomen, for his act of self-sacrifice, is still venerated as the image of an archetypal father. Sorry Dad, I'm gonna have to take this back now. Ishikawa's crime was the attempted assassination of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man referred to in the series as the Taiko, the previous ruler of Japan. If you'd like to know more about the Taiko, I've attached a link to my video on the backstory of the series on screen now. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the inspiration for Toranaga Yoshi in the series, ordered that the Englishman be taken to Osaka, where the great warlord would interrogate him personally. From this meeting, like we see in the Servants of the Masters episode, Adams was able to provide the framework of the real geopolitical landscape of Europe, what the Spanish and Portuguese called the Treaty of Tordesillas, wherein the two governments, rather arrogantly, split the world into two spheres of influence. Ieyasu, impressed and seeing the potential in his new captive, slowly but surely, over the next few years, put him to work in a variety of roles. Ieyasu would give Adams his Japanese name, one he shares with his on-screen counterpart, Miura Anjin-sama. Anjin literally translates as searching needle, but more accurately meaning compass, and thus the closest word to pilot in early modern Japanese. Okay, at this point I have to jump ahead and beyond the series. So, spoiler alert, Ieyasu would soon become the shogun after a showdown at Sekigahara, the biggest battle in Japanese history. I can't go into this now, but please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a future video about Ieyasu's road to becoming the shogun. Adams' expertise in mathematics, geography, and knowledge of inter-European relations was an integral part of Ieyasu's reign. Many people in Japan were very inward-thinking, but Ieyasu was clever and appreciated what he could learn from the young Englishman, and saw advantages that could be obtained by contact with the West. Adams' knowledge of European shipbuilding led Ieyasu to order him to build ocean-going vessels in the English style as an experiment. 2 small ships were constructed, one of which later crossed the Pacific to Acapulco to repatriate the governor of the Philippines, who had, as many foreign visitors seemed to, shipwrecked in what is now Chiba Prefecture near Tokyo. Ieyasu would make Adams a retainer in his court, and he would continue to gain influence throughout Ieyasu's reign, especially when it came to Japan's overseas trading. After learning the Japanese language, Adams replaced the Jesuit interpreters and now had access to Ieyasu and could enter his palace at any time. Ieyasu's desire to increase foreign trade led Adams to write letters that convinced the English and Dutch to open their trading routes to Japan. When traders arrived, Adams would serve as the intermediary. Being recognized as one of the most influential foreigners in Japanese history did come with its drawbacks, not least that Adams was forbidden from leaving Japan. However, Ieyasu bestowed great privileges upon him as some recompense for refusing him permission to leave his court. As a sign of gratitude for his support, Ieyasu presented 2 katanas to Adams, representing the authority of a samurai. He also decreed that William Adams the pilot was dead, and now Miura Anjin was reborn. This action freed Adams to serve the shogunate permanently, effectively making Adams' wife in England now a widow. Although after 1613, through the English and Dutch trading companies, he was able to send regular support payments to her. Adams would find family stability in his adoptive home country. He married a lady of samurai rank named Magome Oyuki. Together they had 2 children, given the Western names of Joseph and Susanna. He was also granted the fiefdom of Hemi within the boundaries of present-day Yokosuka City. At its peak, his estate was valued at 250 koku, a measure of the yearly income of the land in rice. 1 koku defined as the quantity of rice sufficient to feed 1 person for 1 year. Eventually, he was offered the freedom to return to England at his leisure, but having grown accustomed to the Japanese way of life and unwilling to face the long, grueling, and potentially life-threatening voyage back to England, he declined. On the 16th of May, 1620, aged 55, Adams died in Hirado, north of Nagasaki. He was buried in Nagasaki-ken, where his grave marker may still be seen. In his will, he left his townhouse in Edo, his fief in Hemi, and 500 British pounds to be divided evenly between his family in England and his family in Japan. William Adams, father, husband, explorer, vassal, lord, ambassador, navigator and captain, lives on in people's hearts and minds. Today, he is still celebrated in Japan. Every August in Shizuoka Prefecture is the Anjin Festival, commemorating Adams himself and the launching of the first Western-style Japanese ships. William Adams is a perfect example of a man who adapted to circumstances and thrived through hard work, dedication, and a desire to do the right thing. A most worthy soul to commemorate. じゃあ皆さん、 I'm sure you're enjoying the series so far as much as I am, and if there are any other characters or events you'd like to know the real history behind, let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy today, why not support this Shogun grow his empire by liking and subscribing.
じゃあ皆さん、今日は楽しかったね。気をつけてね。さようなら。